Welcome to Matt's Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Thank you for stopping by. I am always grateful. My macro thoughts start with a headline I saw on Bloomberg today. 7 of the 20 worst performing currencies this year are from Africa. African central banks are being pushed to the brink. They're going to have to accept more weakness. That's presenting challenges across the continent, from spiraling inflation in Angola to dollar shortages that are crippling business in Nigeria. As reserves dwindle and exports fall, Sub-Saharan Africa will push its current account deficit to the widest of any region, deterring foreign investment, the IMF warned in April. African nations have an average $5.8 billion in FX reserves. Data compiled by Bloomberg show that's just 7% of the $78 billion average across 31 developing countries, even after stripping out China's $3.7 trillion of holdings, the world's largest. Angola burned through 10% of its foreign currency stockpile this year, raised interest rates, 19% drop in the Kwanza helped push inflation to a 2.5-year high. South Africa, Uganda, Kenya have also tightened policy in an attempt to prop up their currencies, while Ghana merged 2 of its main rates into a new 24% benchmark, effective later this week. Nigeria, Africa's biggest oil producer, saw its foreign exchange holdings plunge 27%. Naira dropped 22% since September, resorted to trading restrictions only to cause a dollar shortage that's stopping companies paying overseas supplies. Africa simply lacks enough ammunition to reverse the trend of sliding currencies, he said from Boston. The widening gap between exports and imports make it harder for the continent's central banks to refill their coffers once they've been drained. This is the IMF again. African central banks are chucking dollars down a black hole, said someone else. I wrote about this on the 8th of June when I spoke of a Sub-Saharan African currency bloodbath, and I said then, that was in June, I believe the dollar has now achieved escape velocity. Therefore, in my view, the trend is your friend. There is going to be more blood in the water. Coming to home thoughts, I liked a couple of photographs from Truth Slinger. This is of Hell's Gate, which we visited once. The second one is, there was this time, he says, we camped on the banks of the river Iwaso Nero, and we flew over the Iwaso Nero from Lewa as we went up to the mountain that I put up a photograph of once or twice. It's pretty remarkable. I like this photograph of the Blue Mosque, which we once visited from above. And then I like this photograph as well. And still we gather with infinite momentum, is the caption. Political reflections of officers and protesters faced off again along West Florissant Avenue in Ferguson. That remains a flashpoint, and it is entirely unfortunate, I think. But the US needs to find a better way of dealing with its minorities. Global population will soar to 11.2 billion by 2100, with Africa accounting for much of the growth, says UN forecast. Africa will account for much of the explosive growth in the world's population this century, which is expected to rise from 7.3 billion people on Earth today to 11.2 billion by 2100. Fertility rates, the average number of children born per woman, have declined globally but are not decreasing as fast in Africa as on other continents, said John Wilmoth, director of the UN Population Division in New York. In countries such as Nigeria, Africa's most populous nation, there are now signs that fertility rates are once more on the increase, which could have a significant impact on future estimates of the global population. And essentially, they were all assuming that fertility rates in Africa would start to sort of taper off, and they're not. The predictions of future population growth rely on accurate fertility rate estimates in the decades to come. This means that the actual global population for 2100 could be as high as 13 1.2 billion, particularly if women in Africa continue to buck the global trend by having more babies than expected. Africa has the highest fertility level with around 4.7 children per woman. Even assuming a continued decline in fertility, given this high starting point, we should anticipate a continued rapid growth of the African population, which will roughly double in size between now and 2050, he said. Africa's share of the world's population is projected to double by 2050, growing to account for 25%. Africa's share of the world's population is projected to double by 2050. Only major region of the world that will continue to experience substantial population growth after 2050. And this big demographic story is what's exciting a lot of investors when it comes to Africa. Nigeria is singled out as an example where birth control has stalled. Its fertility rate continues to be high, with a 90% chance of its current population of 182 million, rising to 439 million by 2100. Interesting, and a lot of people talk about it as demographic dividend. You've got to get jobs for people as well. Think about that. International markets, the big news was China's central bank set the midpoint for its currency at 6.2298 per dollar, down from Monday's fix of 6.1162. Markets reacted by selling the Australian dollar, which is a liquid proxy for the Chinese currency. I'll put up a 6-month chart of the Aussie dollar, and I've been bearish for a while. It's now at 73.20. Currency markets, Euro 110.36. Dollar index this morning was at 97.46, but it must be considerably lower now. Japanese yen 124.93. Swissy 0.9849. The pound 155.79. The Aussie you know about. India rupee 64.155. South Korean won 11.7530. Rial 343.97, Egyptian pound 783.57, and when I checked last, South African rand was at 12.75. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index, and I think that's still headed higher. My target is 110. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the euro dollar, and my target remains parity, and then 0.93, notwithstanding the flip higher we've seen today. Commodity markets, gold. This has had a strong bounce today, 11.11 last. This is on the Chinese news, and I think safe haven buying, but sell it on the rallies, I think. Crude oil, interesting session. Last trading had a big rally yesterday. I'll put up a chart so you can see. I stand by what I said over the weekend, that the meltdown is coming. I said oil is now in free fall, notwithstanding Monday's rally. The end is nigh with the oil-based rentier economies. President Obama, first Kenyan American president of the United States, an oil warfare specialist, has scored the equivalent of a hat-trick at the World Cup final in how he has advanced the US national interest by using the price of oil as a geopolitical spear. Oil-based economies are going to contract, currencies which have already collapsed are going to be routed, and Greek-style austerity will be the order of the day. The meltdown is coming, I wrote. And I said the end is nigh for crude oil and oil producers from Caracas to Luanda, from Riyadh to Abuja. And I said the revolution is only just beginning, quoting Richard Kapuscinski, who said, if the crowd disperses and goes home, does not reassemble, we say the revolution is over. Crude oil, let me put up a 1-month chart. I still think it's very, very bearish. Sub-Saharan Africa, UK court frees Rwandan spy chief wanted in Spain. A British court on Monday freed Rwanda's intelligence chief Karenzi Karake, who's wanted in Spain over alleged war crimes in the aftermath of the 1994 genocide. After being advised that an extradition offence could not be established in British law, he was defended by Cherie Blair. Karake was a commander in the Rwandan Patriotic Front, the rebel force that swept through Rwanda in 1994 to halt the slaughter of 800,000 minority Tutsis orchestrated by the Hutu government, the RPF, that runs the country. Louise Mushikiwabo, who's been at Mindspeak, said in a tweet she was delighted Karake would be coming home. This was an unnecessary and abusive process, she said. Put up a photograph of the intelligence chief. The United Nations is reporting that the Burundi violence is spiraling towards a point of no return. Top United Nations human rights official says the situation in Burundi has not yet reached the point of no return, but is spiraling in that direction. Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights Ivan Simonovic told the Associated Press, after briefing the Security Council, that the 5 assassinations of members of the ruling party for the past 2 weeks are a disturbing new development. Violence usually targets opposition supporters. President Pierre Nkurunziza was re-elected last month in elections widely condemned as unfair. Simonovic says 94 people have been killed in election-related violence. At least 40 torture cases have been documented. There's not a single case of accountability for rights violations. He says the trends are very negative. Padre, who I follow on Twitter, tweeted, "The light in Burundi never gets old. Sunset over Lake Tanganyika." It's a beautiful photograph. I like this quote from the Africa Report. Nkurunziza's friend or political ally is anyone that accepts to see things the same way as him. Anyone who sees things differently becomes, ipso facto, his enemy. South African oil share is up 4.508% this year. It fell 0.86% yesterday. Dollar rand, when I looked last, at 12.75, but it's probably firmed up a bit. My target remains 14. Egyptian EGX 30 is down 10.06% year to date. Nigerian oil shares down 9.26% year to date. It had a storming week last week, but I can't see that lasting. And the Ghana Stock Exchange Composite Index is down 4.024% year to date. Interesting piece by Martina Stevis in the Wall Street Journal. Bad news dims Kenya's star power. Kenya has been hit by a glut of woeful news that is spotlighting the economy's fragility. Week after week of touting its credentials as a regional powerhouse during President Obama's visit. Currency tumult, security concerns, what is considered one of Africa's most dynamic countries, shows how the continent continues to struggle against swift and unpredictable changes in economic thrust and investor sentiment. The shilling has shed nearly 11% of its value. Banks has been increasing rates. Domestically, the shilling has been upsetting a lot of people, weakening for almost a year, said John Ashbourne of Capital Economics. I don't think there's a real reason to expect that it will reverse from that trend. World Bank, and I don't know how they did this, recently upgraded its outlook for Kenya's economy, predicting it will grow 6% this year. First quarter growth was 4.9%, and we've decelerated 5 quarters on quarter. So how we're going to get there it would be a miracle. Kenya oil pipeline accord with Uganda paves way for exports. Kenya and Uganda agreed on a route of a planned oil pipeline, ending months of debate on the link that will export crude from companies like Tullow Oil. Pipeline will pass through the Lokichar Basin in northern Kenya. The countries had also discussed building the link through southern Kenya and the capital Nairobi. The agreed design will be the cheapest to develop, according to an emailed statement from the Ugandan presidency. Tullow has of course found oil both in Kenya and in Uganda. The fact they eventually agreed on a route is good news for the likes of Total, Tullow and Africa Oil, because the Kenyan and Ugandan project can eventually go forward. The only problem is there are lots of issues about security about this line, so I don't think it's a slam dunk as that announcement makes it seem. Kenol Kobel reported first half profit after tax rallied 72.91%. Sales down 19.26%, that's probably on lower pricing. They increased volumes 8%. What else? 69.28% increase in profit before tax. They're also paying an interim dividend, which I'm sure will be well received. And they're calling their results excellent. And who's to disagree with them? Net borrowings reduced to 8 billion from 9.4 billion at the end of the year. Looks a cheap share. Kenya shilling holding in there at 101. Nairobi oil share up 5.431% over just 2 sessions, Friday and Monday. It looks as if we're going to close higher again today. NSE 20 has rebounded 3.85% over 2 sessions. And NSE 20, the stock exchange, the violence of the rebound, this is what I wrote yesterday, admittedly after a precipitous sell-off, is worthy of note. That's what I was thinking. Safaricom up stupendous 10.43% over 2 sessions. Kenya Airways was trading at limit up yesterday. It's trading limit up today, up 7.84% over 3 sessions before today. KCB followed on Friday's gain of 7% with a further push of 0.5%. Standard Chartered bounced 2.9%. EABL up 8.77% since releasing full year results. So what we've got a slightly better turn. We want to see it move a bit higher from here, another couple of days. I think we'll probably get that. So here's keeping our fingers crossed. Once again, thank you for stopping by.